I'm Daniel. In this video, we'll publish a Python library to the Python package index so that anyone can install it via pip install command. We will also create a documentation website at read the docs, thus making it a proper open source project. The actual Python code and all the required components are already uploaded to GitHub, and we went over that in the previous video, so make sure to check it out if you're not on the same page. If you follow along, by the end of this video you will have your library published to the worldwide open source community, documented and ready to serve new users. The first thing you need to do is to create an account at pypi.org. Now we need to add 2 additional files into your code directory to make sure your library will be installed correctly: setup.py and setup.config. And you can download them from this repository and then modify them based on your needs. Setup Python file contains the basic information about your software along with the required Python version and dependencies that are required for this library to run, and an installation URL that points to your GitHub. So as I mentioned, here you can indicate additional libraries that your library depends on. I've only added NumPy, but down below you can see an example how you can list multiple dependencies and their corresponding versions. Now moving over to the setup config, this is actually an easy one. Just download this template, modify nothing, and you'll be good to go. Now we need to push these files to our GitHub repository. GitHub interaction was briefly explained in the previous video, and I want to emphasize that effective software development isn't possible without Git. So if you're new to this, I recommend you study the subject. I will link the best Python and Git courses down below. So I'm going to add these 2 files to our commit, make a commit message, and push them to GitHub. The next thing we want to do is to create a release on our GitHub. So let's go to our repository, and here you can see the new files that we have just pushed, py and setup config, and down here you can see releases. Let's go there, and since we didn't have any releases yet, let's say create a new release. 2 things you need to do here is choose a tag which is supposed to reflect your current version. So our version is 0.01 because this is our first release, and our release title is going to be init boilerplate code, and publish a release. After the release is created, you need to copy this *gz link, go back to our code, to our setup.py file. In the download URL, you need to paste this link. So this is the location of your current release on GitHub, and this is where it's going to be pulled with the new installations. So let's save this. After this is done, we can finally push our library into the Python package index. This is only 2 commands. So Python setup.py as dist, and the next one is twine upload. And the skip existing is in order to avoid conflicts. So now it's asking you those credentials that you used to create your pypi account. So my username is this one, and here goes my password. Now our library is live and anyone can download it with pip install command. Now let's go to pypi.org and check it out. Okay, here is a new library. Let's have a look. I actually had to increment the version quite a few times behind the scenes because I messed it up. So let's just consider we have our library of version 001. I'm gonna open a fresh Python notebook. So pip install boilerplate code. Now we have installed our library onto our machine from the Python package index. Just to remind the contents of the previous video, we've created a code to generate passwords. From boilerplate code, import password generator. So this is the class we have in our code. And let's initialize it, password generator. And we want a password of 14 symbols. As you can see, the library is now working on our machine and it has been downloaded from the Python package index. A bit later, I'll show you how you can introduce changes to your library, and I will also upload a checklist to this repository that will help you make changes into your library without any problems. Now the last thing on our plate is documentation. It's an important part of any open source project. Basically no one will use your library if there is no manual, and documentation website is not as straightforward as you might expect. It took me some time to figure this out a few years ago, but with this tutorial you'll get it done in no time. So step 1, install Sphinx on your machine. You can do it with the pip install command. I already have it installed. Now we need to create a docs folder in the root of our repository. Step 3, navigate to docs folder with terminal. Right now it's empty. Step 4, Sphinx quick start. It's going to ask you a few questions about the project name, the developer name, the language, and the version. As you can see, the docs folder is now populated with everything necessary to create your documentation. It's like a quick start template, but now we need to introduce a few modifications to reflect our actual Python library. So here under the source, we need to modify the conf.py and the index.rst. Let's start with the conf.py. The first thing you want to do is change the path to your package location. This is how you do this. I also like to use the HTML theme, not Alabaster, but this one right here. You're going to need to install it. So just pip install Sphinx RTD theme like this. And again, I already have it installed. Now we need to change the extensions like this. And down here at the bottom, I want to add the GitHub doc root. This is basically a URL to your library in your repository. And that's it. We're done with the conf.py. Now let's go to the index RST. This is the actual documentation file written in a markup language, which will be rendered and displayed as a web page. This is just a clean template, and I'm going to switch it to the one that I've created for this particular package. This is going to reflect all the parameters of your library and how you can execute different functions and methods. We only have one method, and this documentation reflects that. If you want to see how this file will be rendered as a web page, you can use a restructure text extension for VS Code, and this command right here will show you how this is going to look like. But what I actually like to do is go inside the docs folder and execute the make HTML command. And right here in the build folder, you can find the HTML of your documentation. So if you open this with Safari, you're going to see exactly how your documentation website is going to look like. Now that we've got our documentation ready, we want to push it to GitHub. We want to add them first. Now make a commit message. Now push. Refresh. Now we've got our docs folder in our repository. Now we need to create a read the docs account where we'll publish our documentation. So let's go to readthedocs.org. I already have an account created, so I'm just gonna log into my account. Import project, import manually. Let's input our name and the repository URL. Back to GitHub. We wanna copy this URL. Now we then read the docs, paste it in here. And now we need to build a version. It's gonna take some time, just bear with me, and after a few moments our documentation website is gonna be live and anyone can access it. Okay, build complete. Let's check it out, and here it is live on the internet, and anyone that is using your library can go in here and have a look how to use it. Now if you introduce new changes to your library and your documentation, you want read the docs to pull those changes automatically. You don't want to come in here and build this every time. So for this reason, you want to set up a webhook. Here in red it tells us that we don't have a webhook set up, and there is a link how to set it up. So let's go over this link. I want to add an integration. This is the link that you want to use. Let's just copy it. And now we have to go back to GitHub. Then you need settings, webhooks, add webhook. Here you want to paste that URL from the read the docs webhook application JSON. And we want to select individual events that will trigger the push of the documentation into the read the docs. Branch or tag creation, branch or tag deletion, pushes and pull requests. You want to keep active checked and add a webhook. It tells us that this doesn't look like a valid URL. You might want to add HTTPS. And we can see that it has worked. We're all set. Your library has a repository. It is published to Python package index, and it has a documentation website. And any changes you make to the library according to the certain procedure are going to be published everywhere. Just as an example, let's introduce one minor change and see how it will propagate to all these resources. So let's go back to our code. And let's say we want to print something when we generate our password, just to make the user smile. Now, as I mentioned, I've added a checklist on how you can introduce new changes to your library and make sure that it distributes everywhere. This file right here, we want to update index restructure text. That is your documentation. Makes a user smile. Okay, this is done, and we've got a version here that we also want to increment. And we want to increment a version of the library itself. Upload a new version to GitHub. Okay, as usual, we need to commit changes. Now let's push our commit. The next step is to create a new release on GitHub. We've already done that. Now let's go back and repeat it. Let's go back to GitHub, to our library, releases, and draft a new release. Let's choose a tag, publish a release. I want to copy the link of the new release and paste it into the setup.py. Python setup as this. Now twine upload, skip existing, and our credentials. And all of that is mentioned here in our package update instructions. Okay, so the new version of our library is uploaded to Python package index. Let's check it out. We'll go to your projects in the pypi.org. We'll go into the boilerplate code, and we'll see that we have a new version here. Now let's go back to read the docs and see if our documentation has been updated. And we can see that there is a latest version of our documentation, and right here makes a user smile. Anyone installing your library for the first time with the pip install command will get a latest version of your code. And for those who have already installed your library, they can use the pip install upgrade command. We're done.